Hi guys, today I'm going to talk to you about sewing slash pockets and patch pockets. As with anything, when you scale it down to the doll size, every little part of it becomes much more noticeable. So the top stitching, the folding of the corners and the edges, all that stuff stands out a lot more when you're sewing tiny pockets. In this video, I'm going to touch on some tips and techniques that I use when sewing both patch pockets and slash pockets. The most familiar place you've probably seen a patch pocket is on the back of a pair of jeans. Those pockets are almost square with a pointed end at the base of the pocket. You can also sew pockets that are round, rectangular, pretty much any shape you want. Even a heart shape could be a patch pocket. A slash pocket is generally found on the front of a pair of pants or shorts. So you can have either a straight slanted line or a curved line, which would begin up at the waistline and then it would go down towards the side seam. So I have a few examples and you can see here, here's a great example of a slant line, just a straight line front pocket. And then in this example, you can see we've sewn a curved front pocket. And then on this one, we've gone ahead and we've double top stitched that line, which just gives it a little bit more detail. And this is pretty common on a pair of jeans. And then in this example, you can see this patch pocket has been sewn with an additional flap that covers the top opening of that pocket. So as you can see, there's a variety of ways you can use patch pockets and slash pockets. So let's jump on over to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you my tips and techniques for sewing slash pockets and patch pockets. When you begin sewing patch pockets, the two supplies that I suggest having on hand are steam a seam, and this comes 1/4 inch wide on a roll, and then a twin needle. The twin needle is optional. I frequently do 2 rows and I line them up on my machine and I sew 2 rows next to each other for my top stitching of my pockets. But a twin needle is a great tool to have on hand for sewing seams where you're gonna have 2 lines and 2 rows of top stitching right next to each other. So as you do this, your lines stay evenly spaced along the whole edge of your seam. One of the biggest concerns when sewing on back pockets in a pair is that this top section right here along both of the back pockets is perfectly lined up. So the amount that you have folded over is the same, and then the distance that you have from the top to this decorative stitching line is also exactly the same on both of the back pockets. So the best way that I've found to do this is to actually sew that part first on your fabric before cutting out your pocket pattern pieces on the fabric. To do this, you'll take a piece of fabric that's cut wide enough that you could fit 2 pockets side by side. So to begin, I'm just gonna press the top edge of the fabric under 3/8 inch, since that's what's marked on this pattern piece. To begin, I'm just gonna take a piece of steam a seam and I'm gonna run it along the top edge of the fabric, and it's a little bit down from the edge because this steam a seam is 1/4 inch wide and my folded edge can be 3/8. So I'm just gonna place this on here. I'm gonna gently press it from the other side just so that it adheres to the fabric. Then we'll go ahead and peel this paper off. Press this edge under, and this is going to be pressed 3/8 of an inch. So now I have this pressed under and it's secured, but I'm going to go ahead and run this through the machine to top stitch that decorative line. The machine is threaded with a single needle, and I'm going to use this mark right here to sew a distance that's 1/4 inch down from this top folded edge. So for my first row, I'm just gonna line that up, and my needle placement is at the center of my foot. So I'm using the edge of my presser foot as my guide. So to start, I'm just gonna sew a straight line all the way across the top edge of this piece of fabric. Now because I'm cutting my pockets out, I don't need to go all the way to the edge of the fabric. So I'm just gonna raise this and spin it around. I'm gonna sew down in this direction 1 stitch, and then I'm gonna turn and I'm gonna sew straight back up this other direction. And now, if you look closely right here, I'm gonna run this stitching line right on the inside of this presser foot right here, and that'll help me to guide a perfectly straight line. So on your own machine, you're just gonna have to find points that you can use to guide your stitching. And now you can see we have 2 rows of stitching across the top edge of this piece of fabric. Now I'm going to take my pocket piece and I'm going to just pay attention to this top seam allowance line. I'm going to take my fabric and I'm just going to fold it in half. So I'm just going to line up this pocket with the seam allowance line right up at that fold because this top edge is already folded under. So I'll set that there and I will just pin it in place. And then we'll just cut out the pocket. And now you can see you have the stitching line is lined up the same on both back pockets, and it'll line up when it's on the back of the pair of pants. Now this leads us to the next question. How do you make sure that your pockets are exactly the same size? Each pattern piece has marks on it so that you can fold under the edges. And generally these are 1/4 inch folds all the way around. But when you take your pieces and you do them one at a time, you're likely to be off by a little bit. So here is just a few tips about how to make one pocket and then have the second pocket mirror it exactly. So to do this, I'm going to use 1/4 inch steam-a-seam, and I take my pocket and it is facing wrong side up, and I'm just going to take the steam-a-seam and I'm going to place it around all the edges. Now the steam-a-seam is cut at 1/4 inch, which is exactly the amount that we need to fold under. So I have this steam-a-seam pressed on with just my fingers, and I'm going to go ahead and press right along the bottom as well. And be sure not to overlap it because of the paper. I'm just filling in the gaps right here, and then we still need to press it and peel off all this paper. So I'm going to turn that over right side up. So I'm just going to go ahead and press that with the iron just to set that piece of steam-a-seam. Then we're just going to go ahead and peel off the paper. Then we'll use that as a guide as we fold over all the edges. So I start with the sides. And you can finger press that. It's sticky, so it will hold, and then go ahead and press under the other side. And you can see right here, we're forming the pocket. Now you can press this just to hold this part down. Just don't go over this bottom portion because that's very sticky. It'll get stuck to your iron. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my pattern piece and just continue to create the bottom shape lined up with that seam allowance dashed line that's marked on the pattern. So if I have it like this, I'm just going to press this under just with my fingers along that line. And the most important part is where is that center point of that base of the V. So you just want to be sure that you have that folded and lined up so that your point of your pocket is in the middle. Then you'll go ahead and press this to secure that down. Then I'm just going to double check again, and I have that, and it fits right inside those dashed lines. So here we have our first pocket, and then we're going to repeat that process on the second pocket, placing the steam-a-seam on the sides. Then I'm going to use my first pocket as a guide for my second pocket. So I have them right sides together, and I just have that centered right on top of this pocket. And I'm going to fold all these edges in so that it's exactly the same as the pocket that I've already made. And I'm just going to finger press that down, and I'm going to make sure that it stays lined up, and I'll just go ahead and press it right on top of the existing pocket. And then I will go ahead and finish that bottom edge. And this is especially important because you want to make sure that the two sides of your pocket are exactly the same length, so that when they're sitting side by side on the back of the pants, these two side seams are the exact same length. So we have that lined up and folded. And then on this side, we'll go ahead and do the same thing, lining up this side seam and making sure that we have a finished point right at the same point. Then I'm just going to flip that over, and I'll just press it again from the front just to be sure that it's secured all the way around. Then you have two pockets that are ready to attach to the back of a pair of pants. Now the pocket placement for the jeans is just below this stitched back yoke line, which makes it pretty easy to get the pocket straight. The hardest part with this one is having the two pockets be in the exact same place on both sides of the pair of pants. So I've gone ahead and I've added steam seam to the back side of the pocket. So I'm just going to peel off this paper and press this down so that it's secured lightly to the pants. Now I've gone ahead and pressed that. So you can see right here, I've pressed it just on the sides. The bottom is not secured, but the sides are secured enough that I do not need to pin this as I sew. Now I'm just going to place this under my machine, and I'm going to sew down one side and then turn every corner with my needle in the down position. And I'm going to go ahead and count my stitches as I'm sewing so that I'm sure that as I do the opposite side, I have the same amount of stitches. So if I count 8 stitches to the point, I know I only want 8 stitches going to the other side. And for my first row, I'm going to sew right as close to the edge as I can, and then we'll mirror it with a row to the inside of that. Now this is a little bit hard to do with this angle with the camera, but you can see here we have our stitching down one side, down to the point, up to this point, and up to this side. And this is a little bit crooked just because I'm trying to sew around the camera, but you can see how we attach that pocket. Now I'm going to use the presser foot as a guide to go ahead and sew a second row of stitching. So if I want to keep that right to the inside of that foot, then I'm gonna go ahead and just carefully sew while I'm watching those stitches right to the inside. And then we have that. Now you can see right here we have 2 rows of stitches sewn right next to each other. Now we have the one pocket sewn down, and there are a couple methods you can use to line up your second pocket so that it's in the exact same position. One would be to take your pattern piece and actually cut out this dashed line so that you're left with like a pocket hole on your pattern piece. Then you can simply take that, set it right onto your fabric, and then with a marking pencil, you'd mark right inside those lines. And then you'd have that pencil marking right on your fabric, and you would just set that on there. Now there's still a chance that it could shift slightly and maybe you didn't line up your pattern piece on both sides the same. So what I like to do is to take the one that I already have sewn. I take my second pocket, and with right sides together, I'm just setting it right on top of the existing sewn pocket, and I'm holding that down. And there's seam on the back of this pocket, so once I have it placed, I can press it to secure it to the other side. But I'm holding that so it's lined up exactly the same. Then I'm gonna take my other pants, and it's also now gonna be right side together. And I'm gonna line up my two pieces, and I can shift that bottom pocket once I have these lined up. So I'm lining up so that I'm sure that this center back yoke seam is exactly lined up. And then I'm gonna look back again at my pockets, make sure that they're lined up, and hold that down. And then I can just go ahead and press lightly where that seam is on the other side. And then that pocket is gonna stick to these pants in the exact same position as the pocket on the other side. And then when I go ahead and lift that off, I have this pocket lined up with the same positioning as this pocket. Then we'll go ahead and sew this pocket down with the same method that we used for the first pocket. Then you can see here that we have two back pockets that once we sew this center back seam, will be lined up for the back of these pants. A front slash pocket or cutaway pocket is sewn using three pieces. So you have your pants, or this is a pair of shorts, and you can see this curved line that's cut into the pants. Then you're gonna have the pocket piece which sits behind the pants, and this will create the pocket. So these two fabrics will generally be the same fabric. The pocket facing is best cut out of a lighter weight fabric. So if you're doing denim, it's good to use a woven cotton for the pocket facing because it'll reduce the bulk and it'll make turning this seam right here, right side out, a lot easier to do. You can cut this with the denim fabric, but like I mentioned, it will just have a little bit more bulk and you'll see this seam on the inside kind of bulging through the pants. A front slash pocket is pretty easy to sew, and I think that the pattern step-by-step pictures and instructions are easy enough to follow, but I just wanted to touch on a few tips for having a smooth seam under this curve, as well as a nice clean top stitched edge. So the first part of sewing this pocket is to just take the pocket facing and the front of the pants and sew them together. Now once we've done that, you can see here I have this seam stitched. The important part is to clip into this seam allowance. Now I'm doing this very carefully, and I'm really watching to be sure that I'm not cutting into that stitching line. But cut as close to it as you can, just in a few places. And then we're gonna flip this right side out and press this edge so that it's nice and smooth. Now I'm ready to top stitch this edge of the pocket. When I sewed these two pieces together, I have not trimmed this thread tail yet. I'm going to use these threads to pull gently to get this started. Because there's not a lot of fabric for the feed dogs to push this through because I'm sewing so close to the edge, having these thread tails to hold on to helps guide it through and get it started. So I'm going to place that right under there, and it's just barely about 1/8 of an inch away from my folded edge. And if I pull on them gently, my pocket will go right through. And then once you're a few stitches in, it will catch the back side of the feed dogs and it'll continue to pull the fabric through. So I make sure that my needle is in the down position, and then I twist it. I sew one stitch, which gives me spacing for my second line, and then I'm going to continue to sew right back down alongside my first line. And I'm going to use the inside of the foot right here as a guide for my first row of stitches. So here we have 2 rows of top stitching on the front of that pocket, and this is a perfect example of doing this with a single needle and trying to actually keep these evenly spaced. So you can see this looks a little bit wonky. It's a little bit more challenging when I'm using a camera trying to film at the same time, but it's also a great example of a single needle. So let me go ahead and show you how that would look if we just simply sewed that with a twin needle. Okay, now we have a twin needle threaded right here, and I'm gonna go ahead and do that exact same thing with the twin needle. And I still have these thread tails from my previous stitching, so I'm gonna use those to kind of pull the fabric in the exact same way. And here you can see 2 rows of perfectly lined up top stitch threads. So the twin needle is great for this. It might be a little bit more challenging on a back pocket because you're turning the corners, but with a little bit of practice, I think you'll be able to get comfortable sewing with a twin needle, and your jeans and your top stitching is gonna look really great. Now we're gonna go ahead and sew this pocket with the twin needle. So we're just gonna sew 2 rows of stitching around the entire edge of the pocket, but at each corner as we spin the pocket, we're gonna have to keep the needle raised. Because there's 2 needles, you can't pivot and turn that corner. So it's a little bit tricky to make sure that your stitching stays lined up and you only rotate that pocket right under where you're stitching. But it still helps to provide a very clean, evenly spaced top stitched look for the 2 rows of top stitching. So here we have that pocket sewn down using a twin needle. Now this is a little bit challenging because you can't turn the corners with the needle in the down position. So you'll just need to decide which method is best for you. It does keep the stitching lines evenly spaced for all the rows, but the corners are a little bit harder to navigate and keep smooth. So if you look at these 2 pockets side by side, you can see that you can achieve a very nice top stitch look with either a single needle or a twin needle. It really just comes down to your preference of what you're most comfortable with and what supplies you have. But either will achieve a very nice top stitched look. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you're able to apply these tips and techniques to your own work. Now, if you have pictures of things that you're working on, please share them in the Facebook group. We'd love to see them. And be sure to ask questions. We're there to help you figure out how to successfully sew your patch pockets and slash pockets.